Welcome to the weekend edition of Your Morning. Here's our lineup of what's coming up on the show for you today.
We're going to look at the role that stress plays in our eating habits and what you can do to get back on track.
There has been a significant drop in demand for U.S. wine in the midst of the ongoing trade war. So we'll have more on the positive side effects it's having on local sales here at home.
But first, we are taking a closer look at how Canada could reach its multi-billion-dollar NATO spending target by 2035. Canada is set to boost its defense spending by the largest increase this country has seen since the Second World War.
With increasingly open Arctic waters and rapid advances in cyber, in AI, and quantum, with advanced missile capacities, we can no longer rely on our geography to protect us.
Canada and its NATO allies have committed to spending 5% of GDP on defense by 2035. And in an interview with CNN on Tuesday, Prime Minister Mark Carney said reaching that mark would cost this country $150 billion per year. For a closer look at Canada's pledge, I'm joined by Richard Fadden. He's the former Deputy Minister of National Defence. He served as the National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister from 2015 to 2016. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
So Canada is just about to reach its target of 2% in March. But when we are looking at $150 billion a year, that's according to the Prime Minister, what kind of sacrifices will need to be made?
Well, first of all, I think we're going to have to move from a position of national acceptance of this kind of expenditures to national purpose. And I don't think we're there yet. So the Prime Minister still has some work to do with his caucus, with Parliament and the nation. But having said that, I think we're going to have to accept that this is going to require a whole of nation approach. We're going to want to do some major capital, minor capital, some operational expenditures, personnel expenditures, and even there is going to take a lot of doing. We're not going to be able to do this without the active engagement, I think, of the private sector, all of which will require really a national approach to all of this. This is not just a matter for the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Forces.
I guess because it's taxpayer dollars, I'm going to ask the question I think a lot of people have, which is, but how does this affect me? How does the country spending $150 billion a year affect how I live my life? Where will I be spending? Where will I see cuts?
Well, I think that's hard to answer without having seen, in some greater detail, the expenditures in particular years. When do we start engaging? It's not going to be 1 year, $150 billion. Right. The Prime Minister has suggested that, we may have to cut back on the use of the federal spending power in areas of provincial jurisdiction. God forbid that we should contemplate increasing taxes in this particular period of great threat. I mean, just increasing the GST by 1 or 2%, going back to what it was before it was cut, would provide us with many billions of dollars. So I don't know where there are going to be cuts. I'm sure there are some savings to be had in the federal administration, some spending in the provincial areas. Possibly we're going to do more loan. We're going to have to borrow more money as a country. But I also think we should consider tax increases if we're going to be serious about this over the long term.
Boy, that's a case of, don't shoot the messenger on that one. That's a hard one to hear, GST going up and whatnot. How is the money going to be used? And is there any flexibility within these annual targets?
Well, I think there has to be. I mean, one thing we have to remember is that we are not the only country that is committed to increase to 3.5% and then that additional 1.5% on defense-related spending. So if we're going to be realistic, there's going to be a lot of competition in Europe and in North America for defense infrastructure purchases. So there's going to have to be some flexibility, or we're going to spend the next 10 years competing with one another. England and Germany and France and everybody else. So there has to be some competition. I think it would make a great deal of sense if we could agree amongst NATO allies that we need to spend money on, minesweepers, to keep this Straits of Hormuz open, to give a nutty example. And other countries are going to focus on other things. But if we try in all these countries, try and do everything to have a holistic approach to their defense infrastructure, I think we're going to make life more complicated. So this is going to require real collaboration and complementarity, I think, between countries. Something we've tried to do in the past. It's not easy to do because every country, of course, wants to have the full package on the defense side. But we're going to have a couple of really significant major capital expenditures, the F-35s, the Canadian Service Combatants, and maybe a couple of others, or we're not going to do it. we can spend a great deal of money upgrading bases, more money on personnel and whatnot, but it's the really big capital expenditures, I think, which will make the difference. And as I said, we're going to be competing with all of our NATO allies for the defense industries to produce this material.
You know, it's interesting you talk about our allies. You know, since his first term in office, President Trump has been talking about, listen, the U.S. is putting in a lot more than others, and now we're seeing everybody step up to the plate. I'm curious, you know, I think people can take a look at headlines and guess, but I'd love to know your explanation of why this has worked this time around, that why our country has also agreed to this 5% jump.
Well, I think there are a couple of reasons. For one thing, Mr. Trump is not the first U.S. president who's pointed out to us that we have not been spending enough on defense. We've been the recipient of a fair bit of criticisms, not just from the U.S., but from our allies in Europe. So it's been building up over time. But I also think the changed environment. You know, if you look at polling, views of Canadians' views on China have shifted significantly. Views on Russia have shifted significantly because of Ukraine. All of this put together, I think, has come together with Mr. Trump's rather more direct approach to foreign policy and defense policy. You put all this together. I also think, to be honest, Mr. Trudeau's government did not put national security and national defense at the top of their agenda. You know, it was more social policy. I think Mr. Carney is more realistic in viewing things as requiring a holistic approach, social, economic, and defense and security policy. You put all this together, I think it brings us to where we are today.
It will be interesting, as you say, not only getting sort of national buy-in on this, but looking even provincially at what less monies will be coming down to them, especially when we look at a healthcare crisis. $150 on defense spending or commitment to NATO is hard for a lot of people to consume, I think. Richard Fadden, former Deputy Minister of National Defense and the former National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister from 2015 to 2016. We appreciate your time and perspective this morning. Thank you.
Good being with you.
Coming up, how U.S. President Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill could affect your investment portfolios here at home.
Prime Minister Mark Carney says Canada's new agreement with the European Union is a, quote, historic step forward in our relationship with the alliance.
Our strategic Canada-EU or EU-Canada strategic partnership for the future will build a new and deeper relationship that brings us closer together, from defense to digital, from supply chains to security.
So the deal will see Canada and the EU collaborate on defense and security projects as Canada looks to build new relationships with allies outside of the U.S. For more on the deal, we are joined from Brussels by Christian Leuprecht, professor at the Royal Military College of Canada and Queen's University. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Lindsay.
So what opportunities does this deal unlock for Canada?
So it's really about a partnership. And, you know, I always compare Canada and the European Union as sort of a young little couple in high school that sort of like each other and out with each other, but they've never quite figured out what the relationship looks like or how to make it work. And so this is really about getting into a much closer relationship. It is somewhat into a deal that the European Union Kingdom and that the European Union negotiated. Australia, of course, those are our two other sort of most important allies outside the United States in the Anglosphere. And so it's about showing that we have common interests, but that those are not just a transactional relationship, but a codependency. We have a common view of the world, a common set of values, a common way of understanding the threats and the challenges that beset us. And it is really about taking no longer simply sharing the burden, but shifting the burden for Canada and European allies to take more responsibility for the transatlantic and Euro-Atlantic community, for the European neighborhood, but also, as I often like to say, you know, the European Union is a global power with regional aspirations. So this is the European Union also maturing into its responsibility on a global scale with key partners and allies.
So in terms of sort of concrete examples, I mean, how will Canada benefit from this?
So there's a whole host of opportunities here on the security and defense side. A lot of coordination and much closer coordination between Canada and the European Union, modeled in a large part on the agreement the European Union signed with the United Kingdom. There's a host of opportunities for investment by Canada in Europe and by Europe in Canada to make us much more codependent, interdependent. There's a lot here about trying to harness common synergies, in particular, to make defense procurement, development, innovation much more efficient, much more effective. We spend, for instance, 3 to 4 times as much per piece of equipment in Canada, the European Union, as the Americans do. So although we're spending a lot more money, we're not spending it particularly efficiently or effectively. So this is about getting us together. And then there's a host of other areas where we're going to collaborate much more closely. Maritime security, in terms of our joint trade routes across the ocean, cyber and cybersecurity, logistics and logistics hubs that ultimately that we have the same capabilities on both sides that become more fully interoperable, and so try to reduce many of those collective action problems, those high transaction costs that we have, trying to reduce those.
Christian, the Prime Minister says this deal is Canada's intentional first step to participate in Rearm Europe. Canada could supply weapons to Europe through the more than $1.2 trillion program. So what needs to happen next for Canada to join that initiative?
Yeah, so to join, what's beneficial here is that the European Union has a 65% EU content on that program. And so by Canada joining through the Security and Defence Pact, it means that Canadian contributions now count towards that 65% component. There's also a number of financial incentives here for European countries to work more closely on defence procurement, precisely because there's so many similar weapons platforms, for instance, and they produce them in much lower number, which then inherently increases substantially the cost per platform. But many of the European countries, for instance, aren't in as beneficial a fiscal situation as Canada is in, and so they would have to borrow at much higher rates. So the European Union offers a mechanism where they can borrow at lower rates. So there's an opportunity here for Canada to be able to spend its money more efficiently, more effectively, and find key partners that it is only working with operationally now for a much more strategic type relationship. And of course, from the European Union's perspective, Canada, for instance, in many cases has electricity rates that are 2/3 to 3/4 less expensive than Europe, in part because, of course, we don't export hydrocarbons to Europe in the amount that Europe would like, which explains the difference. But so, and given the volatility in the United States, lots of interest by Europeans, in particular in defense, but other areas to invest in Canada. But of course, Canada has extremely high regulatory hurdles. So trying to reduce some of those hurdles and make Canada more attractive to people who are looking to invest here anyways.
Christian Leuprecht, thanks for your time this morning. We really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
U.S. President Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill may be focused on U.S. voters, but here's the thing. There's this tiny section buried deep inside the bill that could have a surprisingly big impact on you here in Canada.
The big, beautiful bill, it's the big, beautiful tax cuts, really, and regulation cuts and many other things.
Yeah, let's focus on the many other things. In fact, let's dial into Section 899. Section 899 would make changes to the withholding tax on U.S. stock dividends. This is a tax many Canadians already pay if you hold investments in the state. So if this is passed, the bill could increase those taxes by 20 to 50%. That could have a big impact on your investment portfolios and your retirement plans. Here to tell us what all of this means for Canadian investors and how you can prepare is personal finance columnist for the Globe and Mail, Rob Carrick, in Ottawa this morning. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Okay, Rob, let's start with the basics. What is the withholding tax and what is Section 899 trying to change?
Well, what it would do is it would take away some of the dividends you get when you invest in U.S. stocks and exchange-traded funds and mutual funds that invest in U.S. stocks. So a U.S. stock pays a dividend, and under this bill, anywhere from 20% to half of it could be snatched away by the US government as a tax, and you lose that money. So you're getting dividends, and a lot of people invest for dividends. They come in every quarter. It's a nice source of cash, especially for retirees. Under this bill, you could lose a substantial chunk of that, and I think that's got people alarmed. It's like, I may have to reconsider my U.S. investments because of that.
I bet. Yeah, so when somebody's watching right now and they're sitting having their breakfast at home, they're like, wait, is this for me, the everyday investor? Or this for big companies, big investors? Who's this? Who are we talking about?
Well, you know, if you have any personal investments, and it could be American stocks, or it could be American mutual funds or American exchange traded funds, this could affect you. Now, is this a game changer where you have to go out right this morning and make big changes in your investment portfolio? I would say please do not do that. First of all, this legislation is being tinkered with. It's not a done deal. It's going to go through this way. There could be changes. We know that Canada and the U.S. are negotiating constantly on trade, and I think all the factors in this bill might just be in play. Second of all, U.S. stocks aren't, for Canadian investors, the biggest piece of their portfolio. And so I think we may just want to wait and see how this plays out. But it is something to consider. If you are an investor who has a ton of U.S. stocks, and there are Canadians who are like that, and you are just grabbing up those dividends every month and using them to pay your living expenses, then you may want to recalibrate your holdings once we find out how this all plays out and the bill gets passed.
Some experts believe this move is retaliation for Canada's digital services tax on U.S. big tech. Is there truth to that?
Well, I mean, the president hasn't come out and said that that's the case, but the bill is also going by the name of the Revenge Bill, and it's thought that this is being used as a stick to beat up people who are taxing U.S. tech companies through the digital services tax. Now, it's interesting that our finance minister said that we're not at this point looking at getting rid of the digital services tax. So that suggests that investors here need to keep their eye on this Section 899 to see how it plays out and how it might affect their U.S. holdings.
Well, Rob, it is absolutely fascinating. I want to let you know that I read Carrick on Money all the time. I'm a big fan of your work.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, so thanks for joining us today and walking us through this. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure to do it. Take care.
Ahead on your morning, how to regulate eating habits when you're under a lot of stress. Okay, let's talk about stress. It's always going to be part of our lives, but dealing with too much of it can affect our health in all sorts of ways. Our eating habits are one of them. When things get tough, some of us either use food for comfort while others shut down their appetites. So the question is, why does this happen? And how can you get your eating back on track even during stressful times? Mental health expert Kalissa Ungazi joins me now with some answers. Great to have you back.
Thanks for having me.
So I get this, and it can be so hard when you are dealing with a lot of stress to either prioritize food or walk away from the things that you know don't feel good, but you're still so drawn to. So stress and food, it's a rising problem for some people. You say this, how come?
Well, let's label it. It is not just North America. This is a global issue. Now, food is something that provides comfort for a lot of us. So when we're living in a fast-paced environment, we've got societal pressures, and let's talk about convenience. It's so much easier to pick up something on the side of the road through drive-through than it is to cut up carrot sticks and celery sticks. So people are doing it, and unfortunately, it's unhealthy.
Yeah, it is. So what's the correlation here between stress and food? What's going on within our bodies that causes all of this to happen?
Well, stress is like our fight or flight response. So what's happening is the cortisol and the adrenaline are being activated and released. And then you've got our neurotransmitters, which has our serotonin and our dopamine, which influences our cravings. So you might be craving chocolate. I might be craving things like biscuits and donuts and French fries. But it's like a vicious cycle.
It is. And then there's effects that happen after that. So then you eat all of those things, which in the moment feel like the great choice.
Yes.
And then afterwards, you might feel unwell. You might be hard on yourself. There's all this cyclical action that ends up happening that results in not great feelings at the end of it.
So you've got things like gastro issues, like you mentioned, but then there's things like binge eating and restrictive eating. So it's all over the place and it's emotional. So some people are overeating, they're undereating. It's really, really hard for people sometimes to navigate the preferences of food and making sure that they know that if you overeat, it's unhealthy, it's not going to make you feel good.
So what are some of the signs that we should look out for that there's something bigger going on here, that it's stress really impacting how we're managing our food?
Well, look at your patterns. What's your pattern of eating? Are you eating consistently? Are you on a schedule? What are these thoughts and feelings that are going on in your mind? Is it negatively affecting your mental health? Are we participating in things like the binge eating and restrictive eating that we talked about? Emotional eating, because when we're stressed, I'm gonna grab a donut, I'm gonna grab some ice cream, and I'm just gonna watch Netflix all day, right? So these things are negatively impacting our ability to move forward.
Well, and I love the second point on this board that you have here, guilt or shame about eating habits. If that's becoming a large part of your mental work that you're having to do to work yourself out of that guilt or shame, or maybe you're just stuck in that guilt or shame, that's a point where you can say, hey, there might be a problem here.
Yeah, absolutely, and talk to somebody about it, right? Because it's important to get a hold on it before it gets too far.
I love you say talk to somebody about it, because there's so many things that people can do to help regulate themselves and their eating during stressful times. What do you recommend?
We can do journaling. There's meditation, there's mindfulness, talk to somebody, whether it's a social support or therapy. I think we need to talk about therapy more, that it's okay. There's like the stigma attached to it, but you can go and say, listen, like I feel like the stress and these negative emotions, I don't know how to deal with them. I know I'm overeating, I'm gaining weight, or maybe I'm losing weight. How can I look at that correlation and then talk to a psychotherapist, a therapist about it?
I love that so much. And I will say it till the day I die. When you're sick, you go to a doctor. When you want to get super fit, you get a personal trainer. So if you want to work on your mental health, it's okay to seek out professional help too. That is really okay. It's really normal. I've done it too. So don't be afraid to pick up the phone and make that call.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming in today. So it was great to have you.
Thanks
for having me.
Canadian wine is having a moment, propelled by the Buy Canadian movement in response to President Donald Trump's tariffs. But that also comes at a cost to American wine producers. In fact, this is an incredible stat. According to the American Association of Wine Economists, look at that number. There has been a 93% drop in U.S. wine exports to Canada when you compare that to last year. Here to shed some light on what he's seeing is Paul Speck, president and co-owner of Henry of Pelham Winery and president of FWM Canada. Good morning to you, Paul.
Good morning.
And look, you're in a vineyard. Me too.
I am.
Same.
Niagara.
Oh, how cool. So you're the president of an organization that represents independent producers of wine, beer, and spirits from all over the world. Let's talk about this number. When we look at 93% drop, I mean, that is a huge number. What are you hearing? What are you seeing?
Well, the first thing we're hearing is that our customers are reacting against American products, and in this case, against California wines in particular. It's I think the best reaction that Canadians can afford, given the size of our economy, is to not buy American product and to support local. And so the American wines have dropped to basically zero in Ontario and some other provinces, and they've been our biggest competitors. So for local wines are the really big winners here. VQA wines that are grown and made exclusively in the Niagara Peninsula and in other provinces.
Is this an issue of access, though? Because we know that a lot of American wine is not accessible to people anymore. It's not on the store shelves everywhere. Is this a question of access?
Well, for sure there's an access issue, but interestingly, we've heard from restaurateurs as well as even some retailers that had residual stock. It just wasn't selling. And we've seen in other provinces like Alberta, where it is available again, it's not selling that well. So Canadians are reacting to really what was a drive-by shooting on our economy.
So let's talk about the pluses for the Canadian winemakers and what this is doing for their business.
Well, it's huge. It's almost a moment in time for us because we have so many people across Canada that are buying local product. It's not just wine, it's everything. And, supporting Canadians and supporting and investigating. And, there's a lot of people that have never tried Niagara wines. And so now they are trying them and they're enjoying them. And we're getting a lot of positive feedback. We're having restaurateurs calling us saying, hey, we need to replace these California wines. What do you have? So it's actually, it's almost like a big sampling opportunity. And we know that eventually that this will change and that the American wines will come back. But we think that it's almost like a tipping point for local wines and that we'll get more and more customers from it because they've had a chance to try and experiment and see how amazing all these wines are.
Well, and I agree with you too. If you've ever had an opportunity to go on wine tours and sample the incredible wines in wherever you live in this country, it really is an experience. Paul, when you're sort of looking long-term here, and we're talking in the short term, what kind of long-term effects could this have on the wine industry as a whole?
Well, the great thing that's happened in the last couple of months is Premier Ford in Ontario has opened up the market so that to big box retailers and to convenience stores. So we're seeing more of our wines on the shelves. They're more accessible. We're also getting tremendous support from the LCBO to promote local. And we're seeing our market share grow dramatically. And we think that that will stick to a certain degree. We don't think, we think it'll level off at some point as the wines come back in. But really what's exciting is we're planting more vineyards. We just brought in 500,000 liters of new capacity at Henry of Pelham. We're hiring more people. So there's a tremendous amount of investment going on in the local vineyards and wineries to deal with the increased demand. But we also see this as a long-term situation.
And you know what, Paul? Like, if people want to just look at this as like these couple months are just a really long tasting episode, right? That people can try out new wines and explore the country that way too. Paul Speck, thank you. We appreciate your time this morning. Cheers.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Welcome back to your morning weekend. We are happy to have you with us today.
Coming up, we're going to take a look at a couple of new rideshare apps.
Plus, we'll have my sit down with 98 degrees.
But first, the world's oceans are getting darker. We find out why and how it's already changing life under the seas. The future of the ocean is looking dark. Satellite data shows that more than a fifth of the world's oceans darkened between 2003 and 2022. And that trend is having severe consequences for marine life that rely on sunlight, which accounts for the vast majority of species in the ocean. So joining us this morning with more is Paige Hoel. She is a research oceanographer with UC Santa Barbara. Good morning.
Good morning, Anne-Marie. How are you?
I'm doing great. Fascinated to learn more from you this morning. We know about 90% of marine life exists in the upper layer of the ocean where the sunlight is still accessible. So how does sunlight play an important role for so many species there?
Yeah, so when we're talking about sunlight in the ocean, we're in the photic zone. We label this as the photic zone. And it's important for animals there because, just like on land, we need light to start the food chain. We need light to start those primary producers. And so in the ocean, we refer to this as phytoplankton. And so when we reduce the amount of light available, there's much less places for those primary producers to go. So as our photic zone gets smaller and smaller and smaller, our primary producers have to go higher up in the ocean, and the area that they're available to live is smaller.
Okay, so we know what's happening. Let's get to the why. This new study shows the darkening trend is evident across 75 million square kilometers of ocean. And just to put that in perspective, that's equivalent to the land area of Europe, Africa, China, and North America combined. So we're talking about a large swath of the ocean. But what do we know about why it's getting darker?
Yeah, this is the really key of the problem. So there are a couple different sources for this. The first being an increase in phytoplankton blooms. So those primary producers we were just talking about, phytoplankton, when they bloom, they shade the area underneath if they're blooming in large enough quantities. And so what we've seen in the most recent years is an increase in human nutrients running off into the ocean. So these are things like agricultural fertilizers, for example. And as we get an increase in nutrients, those phytoplankton, which need two things, light and nutrients, to grow, are growing in such large quantities that they actually shade the area of ocean that are underneath them. So we believe it's these increase in human nutrients and also just an increase in organic matter, little particles in the water column as we change around our food web as things get hotter and conditions change. These particles are less efficiently consumed, and so it leaves more to shade what's underneath.
What happens if this trend continues?
Yeah, great question. So essentially we'll get a continuing shrinking of the photic zone, but also another effect that's important to consider is all of our mammals that really rely on sunlight or moonlight to migrate to breeding grounds and things like that. So it's hard to say exactly what's going to happen, but what we know for certain is that this area in which life is contained in the ocean is just going to get more and more concentrated at the surface.
Is there anything, Paige, that can be done to reverse this trend of ocean darkening?
Yeah, money question right here. So the main thing is to start curtailing these agricultural fertilizers and just put effective measures in place so that if they do run off into the ocean, they do not make it very far, and we're able to kind of curtail them at the source. So curtailing our human nutrients is really the most major thing that we can do. And this also includes our human sources of sedimentation. So large amounts of construction on coastlines, for example, can kick up lots of sediment. Other factors could also include deep ocean mining. So this was another thing that's been coming to the table recently in oceanography. This increases sediment in a huge way in the ocean, would also cause a significant amount of darkening.
Research oceanographer with UC Santa Barbara, Paige Joel. Thanks for joining us this morning. Have a good weekend.
Yeah, thank you, Anne-Marie.
Coming up, how 2 new rideshare apps are looking to take on the current industry giants while benefiting their drivers and customers. Well, new rideshare apps are hoping to chip away at the Canadian market dominated by Uber and Lyft. Canadian app Hoover and Estonian app Hop are both promising cheaper rides for passengers and better pay for drivers. But driver and passenger groups say more than increased competition is going to be needed to improve the rideshare market. For more on what's happening, we're joined this morning by George Wedd, president of the Rideshare Drivers Association of Ontario. Welcome.
Good morning, Anne-Marie. Thank you, and thanks for having me.
Well, I can't wait to learn more. Listen, Uber and Lyft do not share the difference between how much passengers pay and how much drivers earn. Hoover says drivers keep 100% of their earnings, but they pay a $20 a month subscription fee. Hop says drivers keep 85% of their earnings. What makes these business models unique in this space?
Well, in this space, Hovers is unique because of the subscription, as they've said, and that they give 100% of the fare to the driver. But they do take charges for booking the ride, et cetera. And then there are other fees that are mandatorily paid to the city or whichever municipality you're operating in. Hop, so their model is based on a lower commission rate, which they have just changed. So they've put us up to what would be considered to be the norm at 20% versus the other two apps that have a sliding scale.
You've criticized the AI pricing model that Uber began using here in this country in 2024. The model, just for everybody's information, uses AI to determine how much drivers get paid. And how does that affect drivers and overall passengers?
So it works two ways. It exploits the rider and it determines what's the maximum amount that you will pay for that ride, whether it's a fair price or contains some dynamic component. It looks to put your fare up. But then it looks at the driver and it does exactly the opposite. How bad is his day? What's the demand look like on the road that day? What's the minimum amount he will accept? And then Uber takes everything in the gap. So what that equals at the end of the day is riders are actually paying more for their rides and drivers are earning much less for providing the service. And Uber's profits are through the roof now. They've been profitable now for the last 3 years, due most in part to this being instituted in the United States first and then brought into Canada. But now they're making money, but they're taking it from our drivers and the riders both.
Yeah, ultimately the riders as well. Analysts describe the rideshare market as a duopoly between Uber and Lyft. And in 2024, Uber's global revenue was nearly $44 billion US. Lyft's $5.8 billion. How challenging is it for competitors to try and emerge in this space when you're looking at those massive margins?
Well, they have a lot of money behind it, so their marketing plans that they do and their promotionals that they do for both, whether it's gig Uber Eats or whether it's rides, they can really make it tough for a new guy coming in. They can obliterate them in a matter of months just with discounts. Hop has been I'm going to say largely successful in their launch here in Toronto for the most part. They've really challenged Lyft's market share, taking from both, of course, but they're at their 15% market share, maybe even on 20% market share. But they've invested a lot of those discounts, like a lot of marketing dollars for discounts for riders. So we'll have to see how that pans out after those discounts come off the options for riders. Hover, on the other hand, is a totally homegrown app. He works very hard to build a space for himself. We would consider him to be a little fairer in his approach on how he's offering the services to drivers. But again, he's got a number of hurdles to overcome before he actually is going to be a staple in Toronto area that's going to be around, but he's trying to get there.
In March, Toronto stopped approving Uber and Lyft expenses for their city employees. Toronto tied the move to Canada-US trade war. Where could the rideshare industry fit into the Buy Canada conversation?
Well, they're really falling short. In a lot of jurisdictions outside of Toronto, for example, or across Canada by and large, you really do have the duopoly. So if it was suddenly targeting those U.S. companies, then the ridership would have a seriously hard time in getting around at an affordable price.
Interesting conversation this morning. Thanks so much, George. George Wedge, president of the Rideshare Drivers Association of Ontario. Good to have you with us.
Thank you. Have a great day, and happy Canada Day, everybody.
Coming up Monday on Your Morning, we're hitting the books, learning some mortgage math with mortgage broker Mary Cialsis.
It is a full circle moment for 98 Degrees. The iconic boy band has a new album out featuring some new songs plus re-records of fan favorites like this one. Take a listen.
You're my sunshine after the rain. You're the cure against my fear and my pain.
They are currently on tour with a few stops here in Canada, one of those stops being right here in our Your Morning studios. And we are pleased to welcome all four members of 98 Degrees, Nick Lachey, Drew Lachey, Jeff Timmons, and Justin Jeffrey. Welcome to the Your Morning studio.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
How does it feel being back in the building?
Great.
It's a little different. Yeah.
A little different.
Yeah.
In fact, it is so different. You guys were back in the old Much Music studio back in 1998, fitting with 98 Degrees, and we have some footage. Would you like to see?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
So this is the four of you playing a little game of what do you love about Canada?
Back to the U.S. One of them being that Canada has an amazing health care program. I mean, everybody gets health care.
There's a lot of things about Canada, so there's plenty to choose from, and I'd have to say, there are so many beautiful women here in Canada, and there are quite a few that I would love to take back with me.
We got to spend some time in Vancouver and up around that area, and I just think the outdoors are beautiful, especially here in Canada. You got clean water, clear skies, so I just really love the environment up here in Canada.
And I think for me, I like to take back a nice case of Molson. Because Canada's got some great beers. For those who drink responsibly.
It's crazy how things haven't changed that much.
Right?
The drinking, the girls.
Hey, I was keeping it real. You guys were all trying to be politically correct. I was keeping it real.
Okay, so we got the girls, we got the environment, we got
Healthcare.
healthcare.
Yeah.
I love that. Are the answers the same today?
Probably pretty much. Beer, girls. Well, we're married now, but
I think it. Given the current state, things might change a little bit, but yeah, I think for the most part, we've stayed fairly consistent, over the last 30 years.
I love that. I love that so much. So let's talk about the new album, Full Circle. You've got five new songs, 6 re-records of some of your biggest hits. We know other artists like Taylor Swift, Prince, they have re-recorded their material to get control back of the music and of their sound. Nick, why did you guys want to do this?
Yeah, I think largely for the same reason. I mean, you create these songs; they become part of your identity, part of your true existence, and for that to be owned by somebody else just felt really wrong. So it was an opportunity for us to kind of take ownership back of the songs which have defined us and paved the way for this incredible career that we still get to enjoy. So just a unique opportunity for us to feel like, hey, we take ownership of our songs. And again, as you mentioned, 5 new songs on there as well, which we're super excited about. So a great full circle moment, if you will, celebrating the past and the songs which have kind of created us, and also celebrating the future and 5 new songs.
Drew, there are two schools of thought when it comes to recording sounds that you've already done before. You can either do something totally new or try to go back and replicate what it was before. So what path did you take?
We tried to stay as true to the originals as humanly possible. I mean, that went everything from trying to track down different keyboard sounds to finding different delays that aren't even created anymore, trying to mix plugins. So we painstakingly went back and tried to recreate everything, including the way that we sing, which sounds weird, but we don't sing the same way that we did when we were, 20, 21, 22, 23 years old. So, but a lot of effort went into making sure that it sounds as close to the originals as humanly possible, because that's what the fans fell in love with in the first place.
I love that. There is like an iconic 90s sound that you just don't get today. Like there are sounds and weird things that are added into 90s music that is so unique to the decade. So I know that the fans will love that. Jeff, you guys are going on tour. I'm going to throw it back to the early days. We've got some pictures to share with you this morning.
Memory lane.
I love this memory lane.
Disturbing.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, there we go.
Way back, the kids there, as you said, Nick, when we played that first clip.
Yeah.
How is touring, Jeff, different today than it is, or than it was back then?
Oh. Well, I love these photos. These are. I'm questioning what we're doing in some of them, but anyway, it's a lot more fun. Look, back then we were compared to like Backstreet and NSYNC, and we put all this pressure on ourselves all the time, and certainly we enjoyed it, but it was a grind. And now getting to do this 30 years later, we're just having as much fun as possible. It's so much fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Justin, it's been nearly 3 decades since the world was introduced to 98 Degrees. So throwing it way back, if you can take us all the way back to the inception of this group, how did you pick the name 98 Degrees?
Well, to be honest, it was really our manager's girlfriend at the time. We had a long list of terrible names, really, really bad names.
Give me some examples.
My favorite was spontaneous combustion. That was my personal favorite.
I stand by it.
Next issue.
We would have sold 20 million more records if we'd been called.
If your name was spontaneous combustion, that for me puts you in in a totally different genre than pop music.
It sounds like
puts
more
us
of
out
a
of
rock.
business.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm glad you stuck with 98 Degrees. Any one of you can take this next question. Is there a moment from your career where you look back and you think, that's it? That's the moment that we knew we were going to make it. Is there a moment, or does it come over time?
I think we probably all, kind of have different things, but we can all agree on the duet we did with Stevie Wonder for the Disney film Mulan. That was kind of one of those bucket list moments where, if Stevie Wonder's agreeing to do a song with you, and Stevie Wonder wants to do the Tonight Show with you, and that is a true sign that you have, at least in Stevie Wonder's, perspective, you've made it. So, that I think for us, that's one of those big moments.
That's one, and not just to say this because we're here, but Canada. When we were on Much Music, here we had a song out in the United States. We weren't really being marketed to the public there for whatever reason. And, we drove up into Canada. We wrapped a Winnebago with our pictures on it. And once Much Music put us on TV, it was like an overnight success for us. So that was kind of a feel-good moment for us, too.
That's
in
awesome.
Our career.
That clip I showed at the beginning, by the way, was in this studio. Yeah. They were just filming this direction, so you guys were sitting right over there where our desk is, which is pretty cool.
Pretty wild.
We're going to end with some rapid fire. I'm going to ask a question. You guys just point to the bandmate who would satisfy the answer.
Right, let's get ready.
Love these.
Ready? Here we go. Who's the biggest morning person?
Not me.
None of them. There you go. Okay.
Just because he doesn't sleep, though.
Perfect. So who's most likely to sleep in? There you go. Who drinks the most coffee?
Yeah.
Still you, probably because you don't sleep.
Yeah.
Who's most likely to complain about the weather?
If it's complaining, it's probably me or Nick. It's over here somewhere.
One of the two. Who has the most regrettable tattoos?
That's a tough call.
You covered one, so there's...
Not because I regretted it. Okay, it was time to move on from that tattoo.
It was a love cover.
I think that's a nice way of saying you
Tribal
regret
band
it.
had its moment, and it lives on my arm. Yeah.
Who of the 4 of you spends the most time getting ready? Nick.
That's not true.
Dude, come on. After 30
You own
years,
it.
just own it.
You got it. Who's the most likely to skip leg day?
Who wrote these questions? Come on,
Not
man.
me.
Where's the producer?
That's Katie.
never seen
That
these.
was Katie. And then last but not least, who's the most sentimental?
I think that'd be all of us. We're all
yeah.
pretty
We're all getting pretty sappy,
guys. Yeah.
I get it. I get it. Well, listen, we are sappy for the fact that you guys are in studio this morning, that you are touring Canada again, and that you have brand new music for us. It's great to have you.
Thank you.
98 Degrees, thank you.
Thank you for having us. We
Appreciate
appreciate
it.
it.
So that's all for us today on Your Morning Weekend. Don't forget, you can scan the QR codes for Your Morning, the newsletter, and listen to more great conversations on Your Morning, the podcast.
Coming up this week on Monday, we are doing some mortgage math.
Then on Tuesday, we're going to sleep. Sleep expert Amanda Jewson returns to our studio with tips on how to stop overthinking bedtime.
Oh, good advice. Thursday, author Vicky Van Sickle has her summer reading list for your children.
And then on Friday, we're hitting up the patio with Chef Paul Ilikas.
That sounds like a great week ahead. I'm so glad I'm going to be here. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you on Monday.